Good evening, my name is Shawn and I'm presenting my journal club tonight on brexpiprazole. The name of my article is Adjunctive Brexpiprazole 1 in 3 milligrams for patients with major depressive disorder following inadequate response to antidepressants, a phase 3 randomized double-blind study. The study was funded and sponsored by Otsuka Pharmaceutical Development and Commercialization Incorporated. The objective of the study was to evaluate the efficacy, safety, and tolerability of brexpiprazole adjunctive to antidepressant treatments in patients who have major depressive disorder but inadequate response to antidepressant treatments. The trial design was randomized and double-blind, as well as placebo-controlled and multi-centered. It was located in 92 centers around the world, the majority of which were in the United States, the rest of which were split up between Germany, Ukraine, Russia, Hungary, Canada, and Romania. The inclusion criteria were males and females aged 18 to 65 who have been diagnosed with major depressive disorder. It also includes anyone who has a current depressive episode that is equal to or greater than 8 weeks in duration, and anyone who has a history of a current depressive episode that has an inadequate response to up to 3 antidepressive treatments. Meaning, if they have had 1, 2, or 3 antidepressant treatments that have all failed, they are eligible to participate in the trial. If they have more than 3, they are part of the exclusion criteria. For the exclusion criteria, we are excluding any female who are breastfeeding or have a positive pregnancy test prior to receiving a drug during the trial. Anyone who has had an inadequate response to more than 3 antidepressant therapies at an adequate dose for an adequate duration. Anyone with a current Axis 1 diagnosis of delirium, dementia, amnestic or other cognitive disorders, schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, or other psychotic disorders, or bipolar 1 or bipolar 2 disorders. It also excludes anyone with a clinically significant Axis 2 diagnosis of borderline, antisocial, paranoid, schizoid, schizotypal, or histrionic personality disorder. The subjects for the trial were male and female adults who have major depressive disorder with a depressive episode of 8 weeks or longer and have had up to 3 inadequate responses to current antidepressive treatment. The primary endpoint of this trial was a change in the Montgomery-Åsberg depression rating scale, or MATTRS, where their totals, while taking data on their total score from randomization to the end of treatment. The secondary endpoint was a change in their Sheehan disability scale from the time of randomization to the end of treatment, as well as a number of other tests. There was no follow-up done after the trial was concluded, so there is no information on what was done to follow up and see about the patient's condition afterward, if there were any other adverse effects, or if they were continued with monotherapy or a different adjunct therapy that is currently on the market. The duration of the trial was 7 to 28 days of screening patients who could possibly participate in the trial, followed by 8 weeks of a single-blind prospective treatment phase where all the patients received a placebo with a current antidepressant therapy, and then 6 weeks of a double-blind randomized treatment phase where patients were split up into groups to receive 1 milligram brexpiprazole with a current antidepressant therapy, 3 milligrams of brexpiprazole with a current antidepressant therapy, or the placebo with a current antidepressant therapy. The population in phase A was 1,539 people, where a large number of them were screened out going into the randomization phase, so the number dropped to 677 in phase B, or the randomization phase. The arms of the trial were again in phase A, the placebo with a current antidepressant therapy, and phase B, where they were broken into three groups, where it was 1 milligram brexpiprazole with a current antidepressant therapy, 3 milligrams brexpiprazole with a current antidepressant therapy, and the placebo with a current antidepressant therapy. For the statistical analysis, the primary analysis was conducted by fitting a mixed model repeated measures analysis with an unstructured variance-covariance structure using change from baseline to week 6 in MATTER's total score as the dependent variable based on the observed cases dataset. The models included fixed class effects terms for treatment, trial site, visit week, and an interaction term of treatment by visit week. It also included an interaction term of baseline MATTER's total score values by visit week as covariates. There were also comparisons between brexpiprazole 1 milligram versus the placebo and brexpiprazole 3 milligrams versus the placebo, tested using the Hochberg procedure to adjust multiplicity and maintain a type 1 error at 0.05. The secondary efficacy endpoint was change in SDS mean score from the baseline to week 6, analyzed by using the same MMRM model as in the previous efficacy analysis. It had hierarchical testing procedures that were used for the secondary endpoint and the SDS individual term scores to control for multiplicity and maintain an overall type 1 error at 0.05. The other secondary endpoints were analyzed at the same score of 0.05 for the type 1 error. For the result of the primary endpoint, the mean reduction from baseline to week 6 in the MATTER's total score for brexpiprazole 3 milligrams showed a greater improvement at minus 8.29 points compared with the placebo, which had minus 6.33 points, with a mean difference of 1.95, a 95% confidence interval, with a range of minus 3.39 to 0.51 and a p 0.0079. The mean change in MATTER's total score for the efficacy population also showed improvement for brexpiprazole 3 milligrams versus the placebo, with minus 1.52 points and a 95% confidence interval with a range of minus 2.2 to 0.13 and a p of 0.0327. The mean change in MATTER's total score for brexpiprazole 1 milligram was less than the 3 milligrams at minus 7.64 versus minus 6.33 for the placebo, with a difference of minus 1.30, also at a 95% confidence interval, with a range of minus 2.3 to 0.13 and a p-value of 0.0737. It also had a mean improvement for brexpiprazole 1 milligram versus placebo, being still less than the 3 milligrams at a value of minus 1.19 with a 95% confidence interval, minus 2.58 to 0.2 for its range and a p-value of 0.925. For the secondary endpoint evaluation, in the efficacy, brexpiprazole 1 milligram and 3 milligram both showed an improvement over the placebo for key secondary efficacy parameters, meaning the SDS mean score. It showed mean reductions from the baseline to week 6 or greater in the categories of family life and social life for both doses of brexpiprazole versus the placebo. For the adverse events, the most common adverse events were akathisia, headache, and weight increase, with with brexpiprazole 3 milligrams having the highest incidence of side effects, although still relatively low. For akathisia, it was 4.4% for the 1 milligrams of brexpiprazole, 13.5% for the 3 milligrams of brexpiprazole, and 2.3% for the placebo. For headaches, we had a 9.3% chance for the 1 milligrams of brexpiprazole, 6.1% for the 3 milligrams, and 7.7% for the placebo. For weight increase, it was 6.6% chance for the 1 milligram, 5.7% for the 3 milligrams, and 0.9% for the placebo. For the author's conclusion, adjunctive brexpiprazole 3 milligram therapy demonstrated that it did show some efficacy in this trial over the placebo, although not as much as would be considered statistically significant, because the point values were expected to be greater than 3 if they were going to be statistically significant. Instead, they round out to about 2, which is still an improvement and would show more for the patient clinically than it would show in this trial due to numbers. It also showed that the 1 milligrams also had some improvement in the scores for the patients, although not as much as the 3 milligrams. For the strengths of the trial, it was a good idea that the trial shows multiple doses to evaluate the efficacy of the treatment. So instead of just doing 1 milligram or 3 milligrams by itself, it gave us the lowest and highest for this trial, being 1 and 3, so that we could see 2 different doses and see maybe if the efficacy was either the same at 1 or 3 milligrams, or if there was some improvement based on increasing the dose. From this, we can at least know that based on having a larger dose, we are going to see a larger clinical effect versus using a smaller dose like 1 milligram. The second phase of the trial, being randomized, also was a strength because they eliminated any biases in the results. So we don't have an issue where the patients may know which drugs they're getting for treatment. We also won't have a case where the physicians know which drugs the patients are getting in case they have any bias towards a specific drug used in the trial. The trial also had the strength of including the efficacy of the treatment versus standard use with monotherapy, where it showed with one drug alone, brexpiprazole was shown to be far superior when used as adjunct therapy with those same drugs versus just giving a patient one therapy by itself. It also had the strength of using multiple drugs for the current antidepressant therapy rather than just using one drug. So it used paroxetine continued release, venlafaxine extended release, sertraline, escitalopram, fluoxetine, and duloxetine, rather than just using one of these drugs in order to test which one may give the best effect when used with brexpiprazole as adjunct therapy. For the weaknesses, the trial was very, very short in terms of its duration. It was only about a month to screen people out, followed by only 8 weeks of monotherapy and 6 weeks of the adjunct therapy. The randomization phase might have done better to be a little bit longer, just so you can see if there was any other significant change in the patient's condition when they were taking the 1 milligram or 3 milligrams. It also had the weakness that there was no follow-up done, so we don't know a whole lot of information about what may have happened to any of the participants in the trial. We don't know if they may have had any severe adverse events, if they were given monotherapy, or if they were given a different adjunct therapy for treatment after the trial was concluded. And there was no evaluation of the drug's efficacy based on its side effect profile. I feel that's another weakness. As far as brexpiprazole goes, compared to the current treatments, it has very, very low chances, and the side effect profile was mild to moderate. So it can be used as adjunct therapy without worrying too much about having the activating effects such as insomnia or anxiety, or the deactivating effects like sedation. We also don't have to worry as much about the extrapyramidal symptoms, which can also be a problem with some antidepressants and antipsychotics for that matter. Um, for a summary of the primary literature, once again, just to summarize what the entire article was about. The trial demonstrated that at 3 milligram doses, brexpiprazole with current antidepressant therapy is more efficacious than monotherapy with a p-value of 0.0079. So we can conclude with very little doubt that brexpiprazole is definitely effective, although maybe not as statistically significant as may have been wanted for the sake of the trial. It still does have some effect that is positive for the patient in terms of um, helping their symptoms in the event that monotherapy does not do it for them. It also showed that whether you use the 1 milligram or the 3 milligram dose, either one will show some improvement in the patient's condition, although with the 1 milligram, you will not see as large of a benefit to the patient. You're also not going to see as large a side effect profile because of this. And for the application, I do believe that brexpiprazole 1 and 3 milligrams can be used as adjunct therapy. The side effect profile is very small compared to some other drugs. It has mild to moderate severity, and it was shown in the trial to be very tolerable in most of the patients. In the event of serious adverse effects, there were only 2 reported cases throughout the entire trial. So out of those 677 patients, only 2 of them had a problem. There were no deaths, and there was only 1 reported case of suicidal ideation. So it could be a possible candidate for future adjunct therapy in patients who aren't having any success with monotherapy. As far as this trial goes, it was a good trial, although it could have some bias because the company that sponsored and funded it is also the company that makes the drug, which can cause some kind of bias in the results. I also would have rather seen more emphasis put on the side effect profile as in terms of what it does for the patient, because it needs more information so that you can actually verify whether or not this would be a likely candidate for adjunct therapy. Because as much as the numbers are important in showing that yes, these drugs do work, we also want to consider knowing that these drugs work and they are reasonable to use in a patient because it has a very nice side effect profile without being too harmful to them or too disrupting to their life. This concludes my presentation.